Hello, and welcome to Downtown. I'm your host, Robbie Haig, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today. I'll be talking with Scott Smith, managing editor of a number of newspapers.
It changes so much, I have to stop and start counting and ticking them off. I'm the managing editor of the Plymouth newsroom for Gannett Media.
Okay.
Now, just about
Gannett's a new word.
Well, it is, because about a year or so ago, year and a half ago, it would have been Gatehouse Media. But the company I work for, Gatehouse, purchased Gannett Media, which is the larger company, and so we merged into it, became part of Gannett Media, and in fact, our operation now is part of the major brand of the newspaper company, the USA Today network. So
Really?
we are affiliated with USA Today and all the many metropolitan and daily and community newspapers across the country from Maine to California. We're now the largest newspaper company in the country.
Wow.
I know.
Well,
I know.
Congratulations on being part of that, Scott.
Well, I thought it was pretty big when it was Gatehouse, and it was big. And before the merger with Gannett, the company acquired locally some familiar titles: the New Bedford Standard Times, the Cape Cod Times right down the road,
Sure.
the Providence Journal, papers in New Hampshire. The list goes on, and since we became part of the Gannett world, it's an expansive Detroit Free Press, a lot of,
Wow.
I mean, you can go down a long list of highly recognized award-winning publications that have won tons of Pulitzers.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And it's pretty cool being part of that network because we get to use some of their assets. I'll give you an example of something we did recently. One of our reporters, Rich Herbert, wrote a 6-part series about he, his wife, and friends hiking the Bay Circuit Trail from Duxbury to Newburyport. It's a 230-mile hike. They did it over 2 years, 1 year of which was 2020, so they did a lot of it masked. And we were able to take advantage of the USA Today storyteller team, which is what they call their ACE website design team, and they did a spectacular web presentation, a 6-part presentation of Rich's
wonderful
journals and hundreds of photos, and it just got rave reviews. So having this available to us to take advantage of, as well as being part of a really cool organization, has changed it very much since I joined the company in 1999 when it was good old MPG newspapers in Plymouth. But I've been managing editor since MPG Newspapers Day to now the current Gannett Media. And so that's been my day job for 20 years, 15 of them as managing editor. 22 years with the company, actually.
Very good. Well, I want to talk to you today about the books you've been writing.
That's what I jokingly refer to as my wee dark hours of the morning job. I have, and if you want to hear the story, I'll tell you
I'd love to hear the story.
the short version. I mean, like anyone who writes, and I've been in the newspaper business most of my adult life, so I've been writing tons. I developed a tremendous fondness and appreciation for writing at a very early age. It was my favorite form of communication. Give me a notebook and a pen. To this day, I'm a stationery freak. Give me a great notebook and a great pen, I'm really happy. And so, but I also love to read, and I was an accelerated reader in elementary school and so on, and which was really fun. I got into the routine of going to the library with my father. My dad was a voracious reader. He was a speed reader.
Really?
And every Wednesday evening after dinner, when the library was open Wednesday evenings where we lived, he and I would go down to the library, I'd go into the children's room and poke around and find a couple books to take home. He would head to the fiction section and usually right to the mystery racks. And he would bring home 7 books.
Wow.
And he would, at 10 o'clock was his time, and he'd park in his favorite chair in the living room with a book, and he would go to bed after he finished it. He read a book a night.
Wow.
And he was a speed reader, and he would literally read right down the middle of the page, and his eyes just pulled everything in, and he retained everything. Well, he was an English literature major at Duke University. It's where he met my mom. And I remember him telling me the story about how one of his English professors at Duke was the person who turned him on to mysteries as a literature form. You know, people look at mysteries as a genre, you know, akin to science fiction and fantasy and, you know, mystery, romance, all these different genres. And some people, you know, they're not literary fiction, and a lot of people poo-pooed them, and I used to too. I was a bit of a reading snob in my early adult years. But my dad said, you know what, and he was very well read. He said, I read all sorts of stuff. I love a really good, well-written mystery. And it was years later when I finally decided to start reading some of the masters. And I started reading a lot of the old mysteries and some of the newer ones, and I got to love people like John D. MacDonald and Ross MacDonald and Dashiell Hammett and all these great writers from over the years. And one day I thought, I wonder if I could write a mystery. So I sat down and started writing one, and it took a few months, and I wrote a mystery. And it was really fun. I thought, how could I ever come up with all this plotting and all the suspense and so on and so forth? And because the only other writing I'd done before then was an attempt at my former reading love of literary fiction, and I wrote a novel back in my 30s, which to this day has been sitting gathering dust. So when I wrote my mystery, I tried to find an agent and didn't get anywhere in the traditional publishing world. And I said, well, that was fun, so put that on the shelf next to the other one. And time went by, and then it was just a few years ago, I said, you know what? I really want to get writing fiction again, because I love to write fiction. I mean, I work in nonfiction all day long, every day for my job. That's how I make my salary. And but I said to myself, I want to do something that's just purely fun, commercial, that I can sell. I want to make some money. I thought,
wow,
I have a really cool idea. Now, I didn't know if anyone else on the planet would think it was a cool idea. I bounced it off a couple of writing friends, and they loved the idea. And I sat down and started writing this particular book, which I planned to be the first of a series. And I'm going to show you the cover, because I brought it.
Okay.
And I brought the first of the 2 series that I've written, and this is the first one, the Lgbt Superheroes.
Ooh, I like that cover too.
This was designed by my friend John Cardinal, who I used to work with. He's a great illustrator. He does book covers, he does website design, he does all sorts of work out of his studio in Onset. And he created these characters for me after I described them. And this is book 1, A Genteel Exercise of Vigilante Justice. So my little slogan is, they're quirky, they're queer, they're vigilantes. And my idea was to write a book that could eventually be turned into film, because this is a very visual exercise for me. As you can see by the characters, very colorful, very visual.
Right, very moving, very mobile, I should say.
A lot of action, and the way I describe them, people say, what's it about? And I say, well, visually, picture Dick Tracy meets Batman meets Popeye.
Okay.
The colorfulness of the Dick Tracy movie, the whole vigilante drama thing of Batman, and the fun, weird, quirky stuff of Popeye, who saves the day, eats his spinach and saves the day.
And of course his pipe helps too.
And absolutely, we all have our vices. And so I did it as a celebration of diversity. You know, my wife Lee and I have some very close friends who are members of the LGBTQ community. We have family members who are members of it. My sister's husband is now her wife.
Oh.
So my brother-in-law is now my sister-in-law. And so we are very accepting and consider ourselves strong allies
Fantastic.
of the community. And to me, this truly is a celebration of diversity. It's all meant to be read as really good fun, fun characters. As the title suggests, there's a lesbian, there's a gay guy, there's a bisexual guy, and then there's a transgendered woman, who are the characters of this superhero team.
Wow.
And they're not superheroes of the kind that fly around and fight alien invaders. They nickname themselves the Lgbt Superheroes because they all know that they are indeed members of that community. But they all have unique characteristics and unique abilities. And when they combine these really unique abilities, they realize that their whole is far greater than the sum of their parts.
Wow.
And they hook up with a reporting team. This fellow who's the cops reporter for the city paper, his girlfriend who's the city hall reporter for the city paper, and they are, excuse me, they are studying both the criminal and political corruption that's going on in their city. And this fellow right here, who's the team leader, Rex, he wants to hook up with this guy who's writing about all the crime going on. Well, the long story short is that these four unique individuals meet up with these two people who are reporters, reporter, and together they go out and take on all these conspiracy theories, find the hoodlums, deal with the political and criminal thugs, and do the best they can over the course of 3 books to save their fair city.
Well, as you're saying this, I'm thinking, what is going on in your brain when you came up with this idea?
It just popped in.
Whoa.
It just popped in. And I'm really happy to say that the books are selling nicely. I mean, I'm not,
nice.
you know, I'm not creating a lot of wealth here, but I'm taking the business of the publishing seriously. And, you know, so I'm not selling hundreds a day, but I can count them on 1 or 2 hands that I'm selling.
Oh, very good.
Which I'm really thrilled about. And the really cool part of it is that, and this is all about why writing a series is great, is if they like the first one, then readers might be inclined to read the next one.
Sure.
They like that one, they might be inclined to write the next one. Sure. So why is this important? Well, it's important because I learned early in the process of writing this book, but much later than I ever should have become aware of this, is that the whole concept of book publishing has changed dramatically. And I was oblivious to it. The ability for independent authors to self-publish successfully and have successful businesses in digital publishing worlds like Amazon.com, Nook, Kobo, Apple, Google, they all have opportunity for independent authors to publish their own books. So I wrote it, I had the cover designed, I created the ebook, I created the physical book, and these are printed to order, the print book. Mm-hmm. You order one, it goes through the printing press because the technology is completely different. And self-publishing today is totally different from when it was years ago. Years ago, I looked to try to find an agent to sell my work to a publisher, because I wasn't going to try to self-publish it, which meant you had a bunch of books printed and you put them in the trunk of your car and you tried to hawk them to stores. Well, I wasn't going to do that. They were either going to sell or they weren't going to sell. So as I was starting to write this book and I started doing a lot of research about publishing, I came across this whole world of independent publishing, which had started a decade earlier.
Really?
And I was oblivious to it. Had I only known, I would have taken this book, which is the mystery that I wrote 20 years ago,
Wow.
and I would have taken it to the publishing world through my own efforts. After I came out with this series, I went back to this book.
You took the dust off it from the shelf? And
I did, and I have a 3-book series about my character. His name is Peter McAllister. He's the reporter that I wrote in this first book when I was, I don't know, around 50. So that was like 20 years ago. Yeah.
were you Peter McAllister?
Well, a little here and there, little parts.
Okay.
I mean, you got to base it on something.
Of course.
They say
You gotta base it on what you know.
write about what we know. Well, I know a lot about reporting. No, and most of it isn't, but certain elements. So when I created in these books, I mentioned earlier that they hook up with a reporter or 2 reporters, and who happen to be boyfriend, girlfriend.
Okay.
It's this guy 30 years later,
Wow.
in his 60s. And so,
I can't wait to read it, Scott. It sounds very exciting.
well, these 2 are already endorsed to you, and they're your gifts when we leave here today. So I hope you'll
Aren't
read
you wonderful?
the first books in my 2 series.
I'm a voracious reader.
I know.
also.
I know.
And I have to say, to me, now these are my words, it sounds like you took something that a few years back was very negative. You blossomed it into something magnificent.
Well, I think it is, and evidence of that right now is, I just published the 3rd book in the series. We have Edie, we have Monique, and we have Margot. Because here's the reporter who's coming to the aid, and wouldn't you know, it's always a woman. I'm sorry, but that's,
That's just the way
that's
it
just
is.
part of the thing. And so you can see that everything about this design is all retro. It's a throwback to the old Mike Hammer kinds of book covers
Very good.
and those
Yeah,
types of things
yeah.
that John came up with after I described what I wanted. And I would pick, in some cases, characters maybe from movie actors. It's a cross between this woman and that woman. Or in Edie's case, she was based on the character named Edie in the old Peter Gunn TV show. Remember that?
Yes, I do.
Now I'm aging myself. But
You're aging me too, but that's okay.
I loved the Peter Gunn TV series. Of course, he was a detective, and Edie was his girlfriend, and she was the nightclub singer. I based this character, her name and her appearance, and her basic demeanor on that character.
Wow.
So, we tend to borrow ideas from others. Another idea that I borrowed for this character comes from the John D. MacDonald books, which are some of my favorite books of all time, the Travis McGee novels. He wrote 21 novels about this character, who was a single guy, lived on a houseboat, and he was a self-called salvage expert. And basically what he did is people would come to him to help recover something taken or stolen, and he would do that, and then he would claim half of that for his reward. So I created this fellow here, Peter, and because in this book, our opening book, he's 35 years old, the year is 1985, he's single, His parents died a few years earlier in a horrific car accident. He's all alone in the world. His editor had given him a job 6 years earlier after he really botched a story and got himself fired from the paper he was on in Portland, Maine at the time. And after he got canned from that job, he just got in his old Volvo 240, headed south, and kept going until it was nothing but water, and he finds himself in Newport, Rhode Island, and he heads to the nearest bar, and there's a seat open, and it's next to this older man who he sits next to, and for the next couple hours they eat chicken wings and drink shots and beers and talk, and after telling stories, it turns out that this man is the editor of the Fall River Gazette, and he offers Peter a job. And so Peter is indebted to this man for giving him his career back. Mm-hmm. And so for the next 6 years, he walks the grimy streets of the city, immerses himself into the subcultures, and sells a lot of papers by doing a lot of unique and original reporting, and they become really close friends. Well, when Peter's parents are killed a couple years later in an accident, he hires an attorney by the name of Maury Wilbur in Fall River. I used to spend a lot of time in Fall River, and I love Fall River. It's a wonderful city, and that's why I wanted to base it there. But it's also based right next to East Bay, Rhode Island, where I grew up as a kid and where I lived for a few years as an adult with my family.
So you're writing about what you knew.
So I was writing about what I knew, exactly.
Love it.
And because he's alone, he's not attached, he's never been good at relationships, and he finds himself with a lot of time on his hands. So much so that he spends his free time usually sitting in his favorite bar, Eddie's Cafe, and he has a rule that he'll only drink out. He'll never drink at home because he likes to drink too much. So he'll go to Eddie's and have a couple of bourbons, but he won't stock it in his house because he knows he'd abuse it if he did. So that's his rule, but I'm going to control my behavior. But he has a lot of time on his hands, and because he's an investigative reporter, he is able to turn those skills into helping others who find themselves in jams or in a negative situation. In the case of Edie, she wants help, and she asks him if he can recommend an attorney to help her, and he recommends his buddy Maury. Well, then he gets involved in a situation where she's trying to recover what is in essence a stolen inheritance. Yeah. Next thing you know, they're going into dark, seamy areas in Rhode Island, and old mill buildings, and they're dealing with gun-toting, drug-peddling gangs. They're dealing with a nouveau mobsters who have moved in and are trying to take over from filling a vacuum where the old mobsters have left because they're all in prison now, and he meets these society dropouts, and it's all these characters intertwining, and not to give away the story because then you won't need to read the book, but he takes on the bad guys, and Peter's thing is, whereas Travis Meeke will take a 50% cut for his reward, he and Maury take a 25% cut. So that idea is completely taken from John D. MacDonald's Travis McGee novels, and saying that right up front, because I love those novels. They're very influential. I've read all 21 of them twice.
Wow.
And they are, to this day, are really worthy reads. He wrote them from the early 60s to the mid 80s.
Really?
Up until he died.
Never heard of them.
Oh, they're wonderful.
Sorry to say that, but I'm not a mystery reader.
And
I have not in the past been a mystery reader.
And I never was until I finally started reading some, probably in my 40s when I started getting into them. Oh. And
well, you're a marvelous storyteller.
Well, so where am I going to go now? And that's a question I don't know, because my superheroes are selling nicely, and the second and third books are taking off. I'm still selling first books, but the other books are now selling. And one of the adages in this self-publishing business is, first of all, write a series to keep them, giving them something to read.
Makes sense.
But you got to keep writing more books. And as they say, the best thing you can do to sell this book is to write the next book. And so do I do that? Or do I write more of my mystery series? Because right now, this very week, I'm doing a special promotion. And through some book promotion websites and their email lists, these sites have hundreds of thousands of followers. I have put my book out there on Amazon.com as the ebook version of it for free for 5 days.
Wow.
And the whole idea is that people download it. If they like it, then they'll come back and they'll buy the next book, and then they'll buy the next book. So I've only had 2 of those website promotions so far this week, and just before I left to come visit with you, I checked the numbers, and I've had almost 2,000 downloads of that book. So
fantastic. Of the old book, the original.
Of the original, yeah.
Wow.
So it'll go back to its regular price after Friday. But then again, the idea is if I have, and I still have another day of promotion, so let's say I end up with around 2,500 downloads.
Huh. What a
If
businessman you are,
20%
Scott.
of them buy the next book, if 50% of them buy the next, if they like it, they'll buy it. If they don't, they won't.
Very good.
Who knows? And so it
sounds good to me.
You know, there's a whole marketing aspect of this that I've spent a lot of time working on, and I know I need to write more in these series. Except the thing is, I have other books I want to write too.
Isn't that fantastic?
So, for example, I have a couple that emerged in books 2 and 3 of my superhero series. Remember the movie The Thin Man?
Oh, yes.
One of my favorites. Now, that series of movies, they caught on, and they're just so much fun. Well, The Thin Man's a novel by Dashiell Hammett, which is a wonderful movie, and it's every bit as humorous as the movies are. And I developed a modern day version of Nick and Nora Charles. And I want to write a series about them. Ooh, I hope no one beats me to it. Remember when I told you I wrote my very first book? Mm-hmm. When I started it in my mid-30s, and I finished my 5th draft in my mid-40s. And it was an attempt at literary fiction, and it was literally the first of a trilogy that I wanted to do on this character. I pulled it out a few weeks ago, blew off a whole lot of dust, and started rereading it. And I remember at the time giving it to my dad to read, because as I told you, he was an English literature major at Duke. He did his master's work in it at Brown. And one of the smartest guys I've ever known in my life.
Isn't that nice?
And Dad read it. He handed it back to me, and he said, "This is publishable. Go find a publisher." Excellent. Well, so many years later, it had all that dust on it, so I started reading it again, and I thought, this is pretty good.
Very good.
I may go back to my original trilogy and write those next. That one's done, and I have the other 2 already planned out. I know exactly what I want to do. So do I go back into the series that are already selling? Do I go and just follow my heart and write these over here? Do I write about the modern day Nick and Nora Charles? I have got decisions to make. Right now I'm taking a little break. I just published my 6th book, and I'm just taking a little time out while I decide what's next.
I think that is absolutely fantastic.
Good.
Now, because you put this on ebooks,
They're exclusively on Amazon. I may expand to other digital book sites such as Nook and Kobo and Apple.
But
books,
they'll
but right now they're
get
just
to know
Amazon.
your name, so no matter what it is you write, they'll be looking for your name, will they not?
Well, if anyone wants to go to my author page, if you go to Amazon and look up Scott C. Smith, you'll find my author page and you can read about the books. And if you read them and like them, please leave a rating and a review, because that helps us with marketing our books.
Absolutely fantastic.
Amazon has, I don't know if anyone actually knows the number of ebooks on it. I sell both ebooks and print books, but it's somewhere in excess of 8 million books.
Wow.
The highest rank I've ever had of any of my books, I've gotten this one to around 70,000. But what really counts is where they are in the category. So, for example, I need my glasses to tell you this one, because I can't see it all, my notes here, but I just wanted, did I print it? I guess I didn't. I thought I copied it into this. Well, I was going to tell you that the numbers of where the book and the free promotion is right now, but basically it was number 1 in Amazon's free book list, and there are thousands of books there, because that's how everyone in this business promotes. They give away books as lost leaders to inspire sales of subsequent books. It was number 1 in noir thrillers. It was number 2 in a similar, something mystery. I can't remember. I thought I had printed it onto my notes, but I don't see it there.
Fantastic.
And so it's at the top of the charts right now.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, so I'm really excited about that. So we'll see where it goes once it goes off the free promotion, if we can keep the ball rolling. But that's where my marketing has to come in, because, as I say, this is a business, and it only works if you treat it like a business. So the advertising, I do Amazon ads. I'm going to start a Facebook ad campaign, because this series here is New England based. And I mentioned the character Peter McAllister is based in Fall River. In the first book, he's taken into Rhode Island, into Providence and Western Rhode Island. And in the second book, he's taken to Manchester, New Hampshire, where
You're a traveling man,
where
Scott.
an old flame of his has come to ask his help to find her missing brother, because she remembered when they used to work together at the paper and they had a thing that he had helped the police solve a missing girl case, and he was the one who figured it out. It was all by this. So she said, I need him to come help me find my brother. So that's set in Manchester, and I did a ton of research about Manchester, New Hampshire. Yeah. The third book, Margot, is set in Manchester, Vermont. And so a ton of research going into these cities and towns back in the mid-'80s. In fact, Lee and I went to Manchester, Vermont last April to just look at everything visually. I mean, it's one thing to look at Google Maps and you can, and the street maps, and you can see where you are, and it's really useful for that purpose. But to go and look at the old buildings and see what they look like, and see the hotel that had been refurbished, and to look at the various landmarks, and to study the terrain on the edge of the Green Mountains. So we spent a weekend just researching.
I'm going to have to stop you, Scott. I am mesmerized.
My goodness.
I think this is absolutely wonderful. I'm
Well,
so
thank you.
glad you're here, and you can be assured that I'll be following you and your books.
Well, thank you very much for having me. This has been a joy.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
And thank you out there for being part of this, and I hope you feel a little bit the way I do right now, because I'm ready to start reading.
Well, they're both inscribed to you, so they're now part of your library.
I thank you. And I thank you out there for being part of Downtown, for being with us again. And this is your host, Robbie Haig, saying I hope to see you again real soon.
Thanks, Robbie.